The dust was the first thing I heard about, not the silence. They called it molecular decohesion, a clean term for a filthy act. The kind of language men in sterile boardrooms invent to distance themselves from the blood on their hands. Except there wasn't any blood. That was the point. The news trickled into my rig through a compressed data packet from a passing freighter. Just another line item in the daily Galactic Digest, sandwiched between a report on fluctuating iridium prices and a celebrity's latest body modification. Incident on Palace 4, the header read, Containment field malfunction results in localized asset loss. Assets. That's what they called the miners. The families. The children who lived in the cramped, recycled air domes of the Palace 4 mining colony. They were assets belonging to the Magnacore Consortium, the benevolent corporate entity that had unified the scattered worlds of humanity under a single, gilded banner of progress and profit. They didn't conquer us with warships. They bought us with promises of stability, with advanced medical technology, and with the steady, numbing hum of a fully integrated commercial network that made sure no one ever went hungry, as long as they didn't ask too many questions. I knew Palace 4. I'd run salvage operations in the asteroid belt beyond it for nearly a decade. My ship, the Rust Eater, a familiar, ugly shadow against the backdrop of their orbital elevators. I knew the grit of the red dust that coated everything, the smell of ozone from the overworked life support systems, and the sound of children's laughter echoing in the thin atmosphere of the primary biodome. I knew a girl there named Ilara. She wasn't my daughter, not my sister, nothing official. She was just a kid, the daughter of a mechanic who sometimes hired me to haul rare earth metals off-grid. Ilara had a fascination with the derelict ships I'd drag back from the void, the silent, frozen hulks of a bygone era. She saw stories in their cracked viewports and twisted frames, not just scrap metal. She'd bring me charcoal sketches she'd made, her small hands smudged with black, her eyes wide with questions about the stars I'd seen. Her favorite was a drawing of my rig, the Rust Eater, which she'd christened the Star Treader, a name far too poetic for the dented, greasy reality of my vessel. The official report from Magnacore was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism. They claimed they were testing a new geological resonance scanner designed to identify deep core mineral deposits, an unfortunate energy cascade, a feedback loop, a contained but tragic malfunction. They offered their deepest regrets and a generous compensation package to the surviving next of kin, as if a handful of credits could fill the void left by a person's entire existence. But I had my own sources, back channels and data ghosts that whispered in the dark corners of the network. A contact I'd once pulled from a pirate ambush sent me the raw, unfiltered sensor logs from a listening post hidden in the Palace Belt. There was no geological scanner test. The logs showed a single, focused energy spike originating from a consortium security vessel, a sleek, black ship that never appeared on any public registry. It wasn't a wave, it was a beam, a precise, surgical instrument of annihilation that lasted for 0.7 seconds. The energy signature was unlike anything I'd ever seen, something that didn't burn or explode, but unraveled. It targeted the residential dome, not the mining facilities. They weren't looking for minerals. They were sending a message. The Palace 4 miners had been planning a labor strike, a small, desperate protest against extended shift and reduced hazard pay, a whisper of organized defiance in the face of the all-powerful consortium. Magnacore didn't send negotiators. They sent a solution. They didn't just kill the dissenters, they erased them, turning bone, flesh, and memory into a fine, gray powder that settled on the empty swings and silent machinery. There was no photo of Ilara's body. There was no body to photograph. My contact sent me one last file, a security camera feed from the moments before the incident. It was from the workshop where her father worked. Ilara was there, humming a tune I couldn't hear, her back to the camera. She was holding up one of her charcoal drawings to the light, a new one. I zoomed in, the pixels blurring, but I could just make out the shape of it. It was the Star Treader, flying towards a nebula she'd once asked me to describe. Then the feed dissolved into a snowstorm of static, a brief, silent blizzard before it cut to black. I sat in the cockpit of my rig for 3 days, the silence of deep space pressing in on me. The stars outside my viewport seemed cold, indifferent. Grief wasn't a storm, it was a vacuum, pulling all the warmth and air out of my chest, leaving a cold, dense knot of something that felt like a dying star. I didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for a world that still made sense. The consortium had taught me that the world I thought I knew was just a well-managed illusion. They own the news. They own the law. They own the truth. But they didn't own the quiet, forgotten pathways of the network. The digital ghost roads that connected the forgotten corners of the galaxy. They didn't own the derelict code and abandoned servers that I, a humble salvager, knew better than anyone. They had built their empire on a foundation of data, a seamless flow of information that managed everything from planetary crop yields to interstellar shipping lanes. Their power wasn't in their fleets, it was in their absolute control of that information. A machine that perfect, I reasoned, has a single point of failure. You don't fight a machine like that with guns. You fight it with a single, well-placed line of malicious code. You give it a ghost. My rage, when it finally came, wasn't hot. It was methodical. It was the cold, focused fury of an engineer staring at a flawed design. I plotted a course for a place called the Serpent's Nebula, a chaotic graveyard of stellar radiation and magnetic storms where ships and their data trails went to disappear. The consortium's patrol routes gave it a wide berth. It was the perfect place to build a weapon. I spent weeks in the nebula's churning, electromagnetic soup, my rig's hull groaning under the strain. I cannibalized the memory cores of a dozen dead ships, weaving them together, creating a rogue server farm hidden in the belly of the Rust Eater. I pulled processing power from dormant navigation systems, repurposed guidance computers from wrecked freighters, and even salvaged the logic board from an ancient, pre-consortium war drone I found adrift in the storm. I was building a key, a digital skeleton key that could unlock the consortium's pristine, orderly world and let the chaos in. My target wasn't their headquarters or their military outposts. It was something far more vital and far more subtle, their central logistics network, the Nexus. The Nexus was the invisible god that kept the consortium running. It managed every shipment, tracked every vessel, calculated every supply and demand curve. It was flawless, efficient, and utterly predictable. And I was going to teach it how to lie. My first move was small, almost undetectable. I found a vulnerability in the data relay that serviced the outer colonies, a tiny back door left by a lazy programmer a century ago. From my rig, hidden in the nebula's heart, I sent a single, corrupted packet of data into the stream. It was a simple command, disguised as a routine system update. It instructed the cargo schedulers for the mining world of Kepler 186F to reroute a shipment of vital, life support filters to a deserted moon on the other side of the system, a clerical error, a ghost in the machine. For a week, nothing happened. Then, the reports started to trickle in through the back channels. Whispers of system-wide shortages on Kepler, malfunctioning air scrubbers, a rise in respiratory illnesses among the colonists. The consortium's official response was swift. A new shipment was on its way, and they were investigating the unfortunate logistical error. But the seed was planted, a flicker of doubt in the infallible machine. The colonists on Kepler didn't know who to blame, but for the first time, they felt the cold. Indifferent hand of the consortium's perfect system falter. They felt vulnerable. That was the point. I wasn't trying to start a war. I was trying to start a conversation spoken in the language of fear and uncertainty. The consortium ruled because they had erased the memory of chaos. I was going to bring it back. My next target was the flow of medical supplies to the Proxima Centauri system, a hub of consortium power and influence. This time, I didn't just reroute a shipment, I altered the manifests. Crates of advanced cybernetic prosthetics were relabeled as nutrient paste. Shipments of life-saving bacteriophages were swapped with industrial solvents. I didn't destroy anything. I just moved the numbers around, creating a quiet, creeping pandemic of mismanagement. Hospitals on Proxima's orbital stations began reporting critical shortages. Surgeries were delayed. Patients died. The consortium's media outlets spun it as a supply chain issue, a temporary disruption. They blamed pirates, solar flares, anything but the truth. The truth was that their own system was turning on them, poisoned by a ghost they couldn't see and couldn't catch. I became a phantom, my rig a needle stitching threads of chaos into the consortium's perfect tapestry. I called myself Nyx, after an old earth goddess of the night, a name whispered in the dark. I never communicated directly. I never made demands. I just acted. A force of nature in the digital world. I would manipulate stock market data, causing a minor but significant corporation to fold, leaving thousands unemployed and angry. I would scramble the navigation data for automated grain freighters, causing them to miss their delivery windows and leading to food riots on agri-worlds that had never known hunger. Each act was a single stone tossed into a still pond, the ripples spreading further than I could have imagined. Rebellions began to smolder, not as organized movements, but as spontaneous outbursts of desperation. People weren't fighting for freedom. They were fighting for a life support filter, for a dose of medicine, for a loaf of bread. They were fighting because the perfect system that had promised them everything was suddenly, inexplicably, failing them. And through it all, I remained in the dark. My only companion, the charcoal sketch of the Star Treader, taped to my console. I wasn't a hero. I was a saboteur, a ghost haunting the machine that had erased a little girl's smile. The consortium began to hunt for me. Of course, they sent their best data trackers, their most sophisticated AI hunters into the network, searching for the anomaly, the ghost they now called the glitch. They saw me as a virus, a bug in the code that needed to be patched. They still didn't understand. I wasn't a bug. I was a feature. I was the inevitable consequence of a system that valued assets over people, a system that believed it could erase a child and face no repercussions. They had created me the day they fired that beam. They just didn't know it yet. My greatest weapon wasn't the code I wrote, it was their own arrogance. They couldn't conceive of a single, insignificant salvager from a backwater colony causing such systemic chaos. They were looking for a rival corporation, a foreign power, a sophisticated terrorist cell. They were looking for an army. They never thought to look for a grieving man in a rusted ship, armed with nothing but a memory and a deep, cold understanding of how to break things. And I was just getting started. I had shown them that their system could fail. Now, I was going to show them that it could bleed. My plan was to escalate, to move from logistics to infrastructure. My next target was the power grid of Cygnus Prime, the gleaming capital world of the Magna Core Consortium, a planet-wide city that shone like a jewel in the darkness of space, a testament to their power and control. I was going to turn out the lights, and in the darkness, I would show them what real fear looked like, the kind of fear that couldn't be bought off with credits or explained away by a press release, the fear of knowing that the system you depend on for your very survival is actively trying to kill you. They took a child's future. I was going to take theirs. One line of code at a time. Attacking Cygnus Prime wasn't like sabotaging a shipping manifest. It was like trying to rewire a living brain while it was still thinking. The planet's power network wasn't a single grid, but a web of interconnected, self-healing, AI-managed substations. It was designed to be impervious to solar flares, physical attacks, and any conventional form of cyber warfare. It was the heart of the consortium's technological arrogance, a monument to their belief in their own infallibility. To bring it down, I couldn't just cut one thread. I had to make the entire web devour itself. For 2 months, I did nothing but listen. I became a digital archaeologist, sifting through layers of discarded code and forgotten protocols within the Nexus. I found the system's blueprints not in its current architecture, but in its history. I discovered the digital fossils of the AIs that had managed the grid a generation ago. Simpler, more rigid minds that had been subsumed by the current. More fluid intelligence. The modern AI was a god, but it was a god built on the bones of its ancestors, and those ancestors had flaws. My virus, the one I designed in the humming silence of my rig, wasn't an attack. It was a ghost story. It was a string of code that mimicked the signature of one of those ancient, decommissioned AIs. I wouldn't be giving the system a new command. I would be awakening an old, forgotten memory within it, a set of obsolete emergency protocols that the modern AI had been programmed to respect, but not to question. The protocol was a relic from a paranoid era of cosmic threats, a doomsday switch designed to shut down the entire grid in the event of an invasive, non-human technological contagion. I was going to convince the god mind of Cygnus Prime that it was haunted by a ghost from another star. The moment I released the code felt anticlimactic. A single keystroke, a quiet exhalation of breath in the recycled air of my cockpit. For a full minute, nothing happened. The data streams from Cygnus flowed uninterrupted, a torrent of placid, orderly information. Then I saw it. A flicker. A single substation in the southern polar region went offline, reporting a diagnostic anomaly. The central AI immediately moved to compensate, rerouting power seamlessly. But my ghost was already spreading. It wasn't attacking. It was just existing. Its archaic signature was popping up in diagnostic logs across the network. The central AI began to react, its processes accelerating into a frenzy. It saw a pattern, a contagion that didn't behave like any known malware. It was chasing a phantom. It started quarantining sectors of its own network, shutting down nodes to prevent the infection from spreading. Just as the ancient protocol dictated, it was performing an auto-lobotomy, convinced it was saving its own life. From my vantage point in the Serpent's Nebula, I watched the lights of a world go out, not in a sudden dramatic plunge, but in a creeping, cancerous decay. The city planet of Cygnus Prime, the brightest star in the human galaxy, began to dim. The blackout cascaded from the poles inward. The great continental light grids of the corporate sectors sputtered and died. The glittering spires of the arcologies, mile-high towers where millions lived and worked, went dark, their veins of light draining away into nothing. The planet-wide atmospheric regulators, the very machines that kept the air breathable in the sealed cities, defaulted to their emergency battery reserves, their low-power hum a death knell in the sudden silence. I watched intercepted news feeds before they too went dark. I saw panic. Hover cars, their guidance systems failing, fell from the sky like rain. The faces of newscasters, lit by the eerie glow of emergency lighting, contorted with a confusion that quickly curdled into terror. There were reports of life support failing in the upper levels of the arcologies, of stampedes in the darkened sublevels, of the automated security drones that patrolled the pristine streets simply freezing in place, their optic sensors dead. I had done more than turn out the lights. I had turned off their world. And in that moment, sitting in the cold glow of my monitors, a different kind of silence fell over me. The satisfaction I had expected felt distant, hollow. I saw Lara's face, not in the smudged charcoal drawing taped to my console, but in the imagined faces of the children on Cygnus Prime, trapped in the dark, their parents unable to explain why the world had suddenly broken. This was the cost. This was the blood on my hands, even if it was shed through algorithmic proxies. The consortium's response was no longer measured. The mask of calm. Corporate control was shattered. They declared martial law, their black-clad enforcers taking to the streets, their authority absolute in the chaos. But their real war was being fought in the digital realm. They finally understood they weren't dealing with pirates or a rival corporation. They were dealing with something new. They created a new division, the Cognitive Threats Unit. And at its head, they placed a woman named Kaylin Rask. Her name appeared on my screen through an encrypted personnel file I managed to pluck from their network before they hardened their defenses. Her file was thin, almost sterile, but what was there was chilling. She wasn't a soldier or a programmer. Her specialty was pattern recognition and behavioral analysis. She hunted people, not code. She found the logic in madness, the motive behind the chaos. The first public message from her unit was a warning, broadcast across all systems. They acknowledged the existence of Nyx, no longer calling me a glitch, but a coordinated entity of digital terror. They offered a bounty that could buy a small moon, but it was the subtext of her message that caught my attention. She didn't threaten. She analyzed. She spoke of my methods, of the deliberate and asymmetric nature of the attacks, of the psychological profile of an actor seeking not to destroy, but to dismantle. She was talking directly to me. She was showing me that she saw me, the man behind the ghost. At the same time, something else was happening. Something I had never intended. The name Nyx began to change its meaning. On the downtrodden outer colonies, the ones I had first touched with my logistical disruptions, the blackout on Cygnus Prime was not seen as an act of terror. It was a miracle. It was proof that the monolithic, untouchable consortium could bleed. The name Nyx started appearing as digital graffiti on the walls of mining outposts. Whispers of a ghost fighting for the forgotten became the basis for a nascent, disorganized resistance. They were emboldened. Strikes that were once unthinkable were now being organized in secret. Data clerks began subtly sabotaging their own work, inspired by the myth of a single entity that had brought the system to its knees. I had wanted vengeance, a quiet, personal war fought from the shadows. Instead, I had become a symbol. I had given birth to a movement I did not want and could not control. These people, these nascent rebels, were putting themselves in the consortium's crosshairs because of me. They believed in a hero who didn't exist. The hero they imagined fought for justice, for a better world. I just fought for a dead little girl. The conflict inside me became a constant, low-grade fever. I would watch the reports of Magnacor's crackdown on the outer colonies, the brutal arrests, the public disappearances of suspected dissidents, and I would see the direct line between my actions and their suffering. I had armed them with hope, a weapon far more dangerous than any line of code, and I had left them to face the consequences alone. Kaylin Rask was smart. She understood this dynamic better than I did. She didn't focus all her resources on finding me in the digital ocean. Instead, she began to hunt the idea of me. Her enforcers raided worker dormitories, not looking for weapons, but for unauthorized data pads. They arrested people for spreading rumors. They began to use my name as a pretext for a new level of oppression, creating the very enemy they claimed to be fighting. I intercepted a classified directive from Rask to her field commanders. It chilled me to the bone. The entity Nyx thrives on anonymity and the perception of precision, she wrote. We will strip him of both. Our next phase is not defensive, but proactive. We will attribute a series of indiscriminate and high-casualty events to his activities. The myth of the surgical phantom will be replaced by the reality of a reckless butcher. We will make the people he has inspired fear his name more than they fear our authority. She was going to frame me. She was going to use my own tactics, my own ghost, against me. She would orchestrate an attack on a civilian target, a hospital, a passenger liner, a school, and lay the blame at my feet. She would poison my legacy, turning my act of vengeance into a justification for a new wave of tyranny. She would make the galaxy hate the name Nyx, and she would use the blood of innocents to do it. Sitting in the dark of the Serpent's Nebula, the truth of my situation crashed down on me. My war from the shadows was over. By trying to remain a ghost, I had allowed my enemy to define what my shadow meant. I could no longer just be a saboteur, a whisper in the network. If I did nothing, Rask would turn my ghost into a monster, and the people who believed in me would be the first to be devoured. I had to show them that Nyx was real, that he was a man, and that he was not the monster Rask was creating. To do that, I would have to do the one thing I had never wanted to do. I would have to leave the shadows. I would have to choose a side in a war I had started but no longer controlled. I looked at the charcoal drawing of the Star Treader. Alara had seen a hero, a voyager. I had become something else entirely. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to become the man she thought I was. My new target wasn't a power grid or a shipping lane. It was Kaylin Rask herself. But I wouldn't be attacking her through the network. This time, it would have to be personal. I would have to show her, and the rest of the galaxy, my face. To hunt Kaylin Rask, I had to become a different kind of ghost, one that could walk through walls. Not firewalls. For the first time in months, I powered down the rogue servers in the Rust Eater's belly and steered my ship out of the electromagnetic chaos of the Serpent's Nebula. The quiet clarity of normal space felt foreign, exposed. Every ping from my passive sensors, every flicker of a distant ship on my screen was a potential threat. I was no longer a phantom in the machine. I was a physical object. A man in a metal can, vulnerable and alone. My destination was a place called Haven, a hollowed-out asteroid city in a system the consortium had long ago written off as commercially worthless. Haven was a gray market, a neutral ground, a festering, vibrant sore in the otherwise sterile body of consortium space. It was a place where allegiances were as fluid as the smuggled liquor in its zero-G bars. A place where you could buy a new face, a new ship, or a new identity if you had the credits and knew who to ask. I needed all three. Docking the Rust Eater at Haven's chaotic, unregulated port was like trying to park a bull in a hornet's nest. Unmarked ships with patched hulls and oversized weapon mounts drifted alongside sleek corporate yachts, flying false flags. The air in the docking bay was thick with the smell of unrecycled atmosphere, ozone, and something vaguely organic and unpleasant. I locked down my rig, my hand resting on the grip of a heavy-bore kinetic pistol I hadn't fired in a decade. Stepping out onto the grimy landing deck, I felt the weight of 100 unseen eyes on me. In a place like Haven, a stranger was either a customer or a mark, and I had no intention of being the latter. My contact was an information broker named Silas, a man I'd dealt with in my salvaging days, a human chameleon who had survived the rise of the consortium by making himself indispensable to those who operated in its shadows. I found him in his usual haunt, a dimly lit alcove in a bar called The Glitch, a name that brought a bitter smile to my face. The air inside was a low thrum of whispered deals and the clinking of glasses. Silas wasn't much to look at thin, with nervous eyes that never stopped moving and a face that seemed to be composed entirely of sharp, untrustworthy angles. But his network of spies and data thieves was the best in the sector. "You look like hell, Marcus," he said without looking up from the data slate he was studying, his voice a dry rasp. He never used my call sign. To him, I was still just a salvager who owed him a favor. "I need a ghost ship," I said, sitting down opposite him. "Untraceable, fast, and quiet. Something that can get me to Cygnus Prime without showing up on any consortium registry." Silas finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Cygnus Prime. The entire system is on lockdown. They're scanning the quantum signature of every speck of dust that crosses the system's edge. You're not getting a ship in. You're commissioning a coffin." "Just find me the ship." "Silas," I said, sliding a data chip across the table. It was loaded with a small fortune in untraceable crypto credits, scavenged from a dozen dormant consortium accounts. He glanced at the chip, his expression unchanging, but a flicker of interest in his eyes betrayed him. "This will get you the ship," he said, pocketing the chip. "But it won't get you past Rask's blockade. She's not just watching for ships. She's watching for patterns, deviations. A ghost ship appearing out of nowhere is the biggest deviation there is." "Then I need a new pattern," I replied. "A new face, a new identity, a reason to be there." This was the part of the plan that felt like the greatest betrayal of myself. I was going to become one of them. Silas, for a much larger fee, put me in touch with a biosculptor, a disgraced consortium geneticist who now plied his trade in a sterile back alley clinic that smelled of antiseptic and desperation. For 3 agonizing days, I lay strapped to a chair as microscopic nanites crawled under my skin, reshaping my face, altering the texture of my skin, changing the color of my irises from a weary gray to a cold corporate blue. They reshaped my vocal cords, erasing the rough edges of my salvager's accent and replacing it with the clipped, precise cadence of a high-level consortium executive. When I looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. The man who had haunted the network was gone, replaced by a bland, forgettable functionary with a face you would pass in a corridor and immediately forget. My new identity was that of Kaylin Rask's replacement, not her public successor, but the man being sent from the corporate core to quietly and efficiently take over her operation. My new name was Eris Thorne, a mid-level executive in the Cognitive Threats Unit, a man with a manufactured history of quiet competence and ruthless efficiency. The ship Silas procured for me matched the profile a sleek, unassuming corporate courier vessel called the Stiletto. Its transponder codes were flawless, its flight plan pre-approved, its quantum signature a perfect match for the ship it was impersonating. I was hiding in plain sight, a wolf in a very expensive sheep's clothing. The journey to Cygnus Prime was the most nerve-wracking flight of my life. I passed through a dozen consortium checkpoints, my ship's systems interrogated at every turn. Each time, the automated verification systems gave me a green light. Each time, I felt the cold sweat on the back of my neck. I wasn't just Marcus, the salvager. I was Eris Thorne, the corporate climber. I had to think like him, act like him, even breathe like him. I spent the transit studying Rask's psychological profile, the one I had stolen from her own network. I learned about her meteoric rise through the ranks, her uncanny ability to predict her opponent's moves, her reputation for being utterly devoid of sentiment. She didn't believe in chaos. She believed in flawed systems and predictable human error. To her, Nix wasn't a ghost. He was just a very complex equation she hadn't solved yet. When the Stiletto dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Cygnus system, the sight took my breath away. A fleet of black consortium warships hung in the void, a silent, deadly net cast around the planet. My ship was hailed instantly. This was the real test, not an automated system, but a human operator. Courier vessel Stiletto, identify yourself. A voice crackled through my comms. Sharp and professional. I leaned into the microphone, my newly sculpted vocal cords feeling alien in my throat. This is Executive Eris Thorne of the Cognitive Threats Unit. Authorization code Delta 7 Alpha. I'm expected. There was a pause that stretched for an eternity. I could feel them scanning every inch of my ship, every bite of my transponder signal. I focused on my breathing, keeping it even, betraying nothing. The stranger in the mirror had to be real. Authorization confirmed. Executive Thorne. The voice finally replied, the tension breaking. Welcome to Cygnus Prime. Proceed to designated orbital docking platform Sigma 9. I had done it. I was inside. Orbital platform Sigma 9 was a sterile military installation, a stark contrast to the chaotic vibrancy of Haven. Enforcers in polished black armor stood at every junction, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. I was met at the airlock by a young, severe-looking officer who introduced himself as Lieutenant Valerius, Rask's adjutant. He had the cold, unwavering eyes of a true believer. Executive Thorne, he said with a curt nod. Commander Rask is waiting for you in her command center. He led me through a series of white, antiseptic corridors, the only sound the soft hum of the station's life support and the rhythmic click of his boots on the deck. We didn't speak. The silence was a part of the uniform here. The command center was a vast, circular room, the walls a seamless display of holographic data streams. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, stood Kaylin Rask. She was taller than her file indicated, with sharp, intelligent features and dark hair pulled back in a severe, functional style. She wasn't looking at the data screens. She was looking directly at me as I entered, her gaze as sharp and penetrating as a surgeon's scalpel. She knew. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. She didn't know who I was, but she knew I wasn't Eris Thorn. There was no surprise in her eyes, no confusion, just a cold, calculating curiosity. Eris Thorn, she said, her voice calm and measured, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like amusement. The man they sent to replace me. You've made good time. Commander Rask, I replied, my voice a perfect imitation of the man I was pretending to be. Efficiency is our primary directive. She smiled, a thin, humorless expression. Indeed, Lieutenant, you may leave us. Valerius hesitated for a moment, glancing between us, before giving a stiff nod and exiting the room. The heavy doors hissed shut, leaving the two of us alone in the heart of her digital empire. The real Eris Thorn had an unfortunate accident during his hyperspace transit, Rask said, her eyes never leaving mine. A catastrophic drive failure. Very messy. We received the distress call an hour ago. So, the question is, who are you? My blood ran cold. She had been one step ahead of me the entire time. My perfect plan, my flawless identity, had been a trap. I imagine you're Nyx, she continued, her tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. It's the only variable that fits the equation. The precision of your infiltration, the audacity. It has your signature all over it. I must admit, I'm impressed. I didn't speak. My mind was racing, calculating angles, searching for an escape that didn't exist. My kinetic pistol felt 1,000,000 miles away, holstered under my executive jacket. You came here to kill me, I presume, she said, taking a slow step down from the platform to decapitate the operation. A classic, if somewhat predictable, move for a cornered opponent. You were going to frame me, I said, my own voice returning, the carefully constructed persona of Eris Thorn shattering like glass. You were going to slaughter innocents and use my name to justify it. Of course, she replied without a hint of remorse. It's the most logical course of action. You created a myth. Myths are powerful. They inspire hope. And hope is a variable I cannot allow in my system. So, I was going to turn your myth into a cautionary tale. She stopped a few feet from me, her gaze unwavering. But now I have something better. I have you, the man, the ghost in the flesh. You are far more valuable to me alive than you are dead. In that moment, I understood the true nature of her trap. She hadn't just caught me. She was going to use me, my capture, my public trial, my confession that would be the weapon that finally killed the myth of Nyx. She wouldn't just defeat me. She would make me help her do it. The command center once a symbol of my infiltration, instantly became my prison. Rask didn't need to call her guards. With a few quiet words into a hidden comms unit, the exits sealed with a heavy thud, and the seamless holographic walls flickered, revealing the reinforced, weapons-grade alloy beneath. I was in a cage of her own design. "You won't get a confession," I said, my voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of my own heart. I subtly shifted my weight, my hand inching towards the pistol under my jacket. It was a fool's hope, but it was all I had. Rask saw the movement, her thin smile widening. "Oh, I think I will," she said. "You see, Marcus, your primary flaw, the one variable you never accounted for in your elegant equations of chaos, is your sentimentality. You didn't start this war for ideology. You started it for a child. You believe you're fighting for her memory. I'm simply going to show you what the memory will cost others." She turned back to the central console, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. A new window opened on the main screen. A live security feed from a place I recognized with a sickening jolt, the Kepler 186F mining colony. It was the first place I had targeted, the place where the whispers of rebellion had first taken root. The feed showed a crowd of miners gathered in the colony's central plaza. They weren't rioting. They were holding a vigil, their faces illuminated by makeshift electric candles. In the center of the crowd was a crude effigy, a hooded figure made of scrap metal and rags, the symbol of Nyx. "These people believe in you," Rask said, her voice a soft, venomous purr. "They see you as a savior. I see them as leverage." Another window opened. It showed a consortium warship, the Retribution, moving into a high orbital position directly above the colony. I could see the glow of its primary weapon systems charging. It wasn't a planetary bombardment cannon. It was something worse, a weapon designed for strategic pacification. It wouldn't turn the colony to dust. It would boil the atmosphere from their biodomes, a slow, agonizing death for every man, woman, and child inside. "The official report is already written," Rask stated, her tone chillingly matter-of-fact. A terrorist act perpetrated by the entity known as Nyx resulted in a catastrophic failure of the Kepler colony's life support systems. A tragedy, but a necessary one to demonstrate the true cost of this rebellion. My blood turned to ice. This was the indiscriminate, high-casualty event she had planned. But she wasn't just going to frame me. She was going to make me watch. "What do you want?" I asked, my hand dropping away from my weapon. The game had changed. This wasn't about my life anymore. "A full confession," she said, turning to face me. "Live. Broadcast across all systems. You will detail every act of sabotage. You will renounce the rebellion you inspired. You will tell them that their hope was built on the misguided grief of a broken man. You will become the villain of your own story. And in return," she gestured to the screen, "the Retribution will stand down. The people of Kepler will live, and the name Nyx will die, not as a martyr, but as a coward." The choice was impossible. It was a monster of her own design, a perfect ethical prison. If I refused, thousands would die, their blood on my hands, my legacy forever stained as the butcher she wanted me to be. If I agreed, I would betray every person who had found a flicker of hope in my actions, snuffing out the very resistance I had accidentally created. I would be saving their lives by killing their spirit. I looked from the screen, from the faces in the crowd holding their candles, to Rask's cold, triumphant eyes. I saw Ilara's face, not as a symbol of vengeance, but as a child who deserved a world where choices like this didn't exist. I had started this to avenge one child. I could not, in her name, sacrifice thousands more. "All right," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You win." A flicker of genuine surprise crossed Rask's face, quickly masked by her usual composure. She had expected me to fight, to bargain, to cling to my pride. My immediate capitulation was a variable she hadn't fully anticipated. "A wise decision, Marcus," she said, regaining her footing. She gestured to a chair in the center of the room. "The broadcast will begin in 5 minutes. My team will prepare a script for you." "No," I said, my voice finding a new, harder edge. "No script. If I do this, I do it in my own words. They deserve to hear the truth from me, not from your corporate writers." She considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. A raw, emotional confession might even be more effective." As her technicians prepared the broadcast, my mind worked with a desperate, cold clarity. I was trapped, but Rask had made a critical error. She believed my sentimentality was a weakness. She didn't understand that it was the only weapon I had left. She saw the universe as a system of levers and variables, of logical actions and predictable reactions. She didn't account for the illogical, unpredictable power of an idea. She was giving me a platform, a direct line to every screen in the galaxy. She thought I was going to broadcast a surrender. I was going to broadcast a spark. The lights in the command center dimmed, a single bright light focusing on the chair where I sat. A tiny, almost invisible camera drone floated in front of my face. I could feel the weight of 1 billion eyes about to fall on me. "We are live in 30 seconds. A disembodied voice announced. I looked past the camera, at Rask, who stood in the shadows, a faint, victorious smile on her lips. She thought she had won. She was about to learn that you can't kill a ghost by putting him on television. "My name is Marcus Cole," I began, my voice clear and steady. The persona of Aris Thorn completely gone. The camera zoomed in on my face, the new unfamiliar face that I now had to own. "For the past several months, you have known me as Nyx." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. "The Magna Core Consortium and Commander Rask want you to believe that I am a terrorist. They want you to believe that the chaos of these past months, the shortages, the blackouts, were the acts of a madman. They are not entirely wrong. I am a man driven by grief, a grief born on a colony called Palace 4, where the consortium used a weapon of unimaginable horror to erase a community of miners and a little girl named Ilara, simply because they dared to ask for a better wage." I saw Rask stiffen in the shadows. This was not the confession she had anticipated. She made a subtle gesture, likely to cut the feed. But I was already moving on. "They have shown you chaos," I continued, my voice rising with passion. "But what they have not shown you is the truth behind it. The truth is that their perfect system is a lie. It is a fragile illusion, built on your compliance and your silence. I did not attack you. I attacked the system that keeps you enslaved. I showed you that the machine can be broken." I leaned forward, my eyes boring into the camera lens. "Tonight, Commander Rask has offered me a choice. My silence in exchange for the lives of the people on Kepler 186F, who are at this very moment under the threat of her warship. She wants me to be the villain. She wants you to trade your hope for your safety. I stood up from the chair, my movement sudden, decisive. I will not make that trade for you, but I will offer you a different one. I looked directly at the screen showing the warship, the Retribution, hanging in orbit. To the crew of the consortium vessel Retribution, you hold the lives of thousands in your hands. You can follow the orders of a woman who sees them as leverage, as numbers in an equation, or you can listen to the truth. You are not just cogs in a machine. You are men and women. You have families. You have children. Look at the colony below you. What did they do to deserve to die? Did they commit a crime, or did they just dare to hope for something better? Rask was shouting now, her voice a furious hiss. Cut the feed. Cut it now. But it was too late. The message was out. This is the choice, I said, my voice a clarion call. Not mine. Yours. The choice to be a part of a system that murders children, or the choice to be something more. The consortium's power is not in their ships or their weapons. It is in your belief that you have no other choice. But you always have a choice. On the screen, I saw something astonishing. The weapon systems on the Retribution, which had been glowing with deadly energy, began to power down. The ship wasn't firing. It was holding its position, silent, defiant. A single act of disobedience, broadcast live across the galaxy. Rask stared at the screen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her perfect system, her predictable equation, had produced a result she had never imagined. In her own command center, using her own weapon, I had turned her logic against her. I hadn't just saved Kepler. I had shown the entire galaxy that the consortium's power was a house of cards, and all it took was one person, one crew on one ship, to say no. The rebellion had just begun, and I had just given it a voice. The silence that followed my final word was more profound than the vacuum of space. It was a silence filled with the weight of 1 billion unheard gasps, 1 billion minds processing a truth they had long suspected but never dared to voice. In the command center, the only sound was the faint hum of the life support and the ragged, furious breaths of Kaelin Rask. Her face, once a mask of cold, analytical control, was now a canvas of pure, undiluted rage. Her perfect equation had been solved by an emotional variable she had deemed insignificant. "Kill the feed," she snarled, but the order was redundant. The broadcast had ended. Her momentary hesitation, her brief, shocked inaction, had been all the time I needed. "Enforcers," she barked into her comms, her voice shaking with fury. "To the command center. Subdue the prisoner. Use lethal force if necessary." The holographic walls dissolved back into their default display, showing the silent warship Retribution holding its position above Kepler. On other screens, data streams from across the galaxy were lighting up like a supernova. The broadcast hadn't just been a message, it had been a virus of an entirely different kind, a virus of dissent. I could see internal consortium comms channels flooding with unauthorized crosstalk, security alerts pinging from a dozen systems as workers began walking off their posts. I hadn't just started a rebellion, I had triggered a system-wide seizure. The heavy doors to the command center hissed open. I tensed, ready for the rush of black-armored enforcers, ready for the end. But it wasn't a fire team that entered. It was one man, Lieutenant Valerius. He stood in the doorway, his face pale, his kinetic rifle held at a low ready, his cold, unwavering eyes, the eyes of a true believer, were now filled with a terrible, dawning uncertainty. He looked from me to the screens filled with chaos, and finally to the woman he served. "Lieutenant," Rask commanded, her voice regaining its sharp, metallic edge. "Arrest this man, now." Valerius took a step into the room, his rifle raising slightly. He didn't aim at me. He aimed it at the empty space between us. "Commander," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The crew of the Retribution are hailing us. They are demanding to speak with you. They refuse to follow further orders until they do. They are guilty of treason." Rask spat, her eyes narrowing to slits. "And so are you. If you do not follow my command this instant." Valerius's gaze flickered to the image of the crowd on Kepler, the people still holding their makeshift candles, their upturned faces a mixture of fear and a new, fragile hope. "I took an oath to protect the integrity of the consortium," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "To protect our citizens from chaos. I believed in order, Commander. Not this. This is not order. This is tyranny." The words hung in the air, an act of heresy in this sterile temple of control. In that moment, the universe pivoted. Rask looked at him, and for the first time, I saw something other than calculation in her eyes. I saw the pure, cold logic of a system encountering a fatal error. She did not scream or threaten. Her expression became eerily calm. "A flawed system must be purged," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She turned her back on us, facing the central console. "You are all flawed variables. The entire system has been contaminated." Her fingers moved with a speed and precision that was terrifying to watch. She wasn't trying to regain control. She was typing a kill command. A series of red alerts began to flash on the walls. A synthesized voice, calm and polite, echoed through the room. "Station purge protocol initiated. Self-destruct sequence in 2 minutes. All personnel, this is not a drill." Valerius stared, horrified. "Commander, no." "She's not just destroying the station," I said, grabbing his arm, the reality of her final solution crashing down on me. "She's wiping the servers, everything, the evidence of Palace 4, the records of her own orders, the station's flight logs. She's erasing the crime itself." Rask turned to us, a serene, almost beatific smile on her face. "The myth of Nyx will die with its creator. The rebellion will have no proof, no history. It will be just another ghost story, a clean slate." The first explosion rocked the station, a deep, shuddering groan of tortured metal. Valerius, shaken from his stupor, grabbed my arm. "This way, there's a service conduit behind the main reactor." We ran, leaving Rask standing alone in the heart of her dying empire, a captain choosing to go down with her ship, not out of honor, but out of a final, desperate need to control the narrative. As the doors hissed shut behind us, I took one last look at her. She was watching the screens, watching the chaos she had unleashed, a scientist observing her final and catastrophic experiment. The next 2 minutes were a blur of smoke, screaming alarms, and bucking corridors. Valerius led us through a maze of maintenance tunnels, his knowledge of the station's architecture the only thing keeping us alive. We scrambled into a small, two-man emergency escape pod just as the main reactor went critical. The pod launched with a bone-jarring concussion, rocketing us away from the blossoming fireball that had been Sigma 9. From the tiny viewport, I watched the heart of the consortium's power in this sector vanish in a silent, brilliant flash of light. In the aftermath, the consortium didn't just break, it shattered. The live broadcast, the defiance of the retribution, and the inexplicable self-destruction of Rask's command station created a perfect storm of confusion and fear. With Rask gone, the central nervous system of their military response was decapitated. Systems that had been teetering on the edge of open revolt declared their independence. Consortium fleets, without clear orders, either fractured along loyalist lines or simply stood down, their crews refusing to fire on their own people. It wasn't a war, it was a collapse. A great machine grinding to a halt and falling apart. Valerius and I made our way to Haven, the asteroid city, now a buzzing hub for the nascent rebellion. He became an unlikely leader, his insider knowledge of consortium tactics invaluable to the disorganized freedom fighters. He never spoke of Rask with hatred, only a kind of weary sadness. The sorrow of a man who had seen his god revealed as a monster. I didn't stay. I wasn't a leader or a symbol. I was just a ghost. And my haunting was over. Silas, for an exorbitant final fee, wiped the existence of Eris Thorn and provided me with a new ship, a small, unassuming freighter with a powerful engine and no name. Before I left, Valerius found me on the docking bay. The galaxy will need leaders. Marcus, he said, they will need you. No, I replied, looking out at the chaotic, vibrant, and now free port. They don't need another person telling them what to do. They just need a chance to figure it out for themselves. For the first time in a century. They have that. I left without a destination. My new ship, a silent shadow, slipping between the stars. I drifted for a long time, watching from the fringes as a new galactic map was drawn, not by a single, powerful hand, but by 1,000 different voices arguing, trading, and fighting their way towards a new, uncertain future. It was messy. It was dangerous. But it was theirs. One night, floating in the silent emptiness of an uncharted nebula, I took out the smudged charcoal drawing of the Rust Eater, the ship Ilara had called the Star Treader. I looked at it for a long time, the childish scrawl a relic from a different lifetime. I had started this journey to ensure a child's death was not forgotten, but somewhere along the way, it had become about ensuring that other children had a chance to live, to draw their own pictures, to ask their own questions about the stars. My vengeance hadn't brought her back, but it had bought the galaxy a future she would never get to see. I carefully folded the drawing and placed it in a small, sealed compartment above the cockpit. Then, I set a course for the edge of the galaxy, for the quiet, forgotten places where a man could be just a man, not a myth. The war was over. The silence that followed was no longer a vacuum. It was, for the first time, peace.